Greetings all, Ben East West. Just going to take a look at uranium. We're going to focus today on Cameco because I wanted to do something a little bit different here. And I need to re-examine the ideas that I had about the market, because I think there's another scenario emerging here that I think I've got to pay attention to, because maybe I've missed it and it was kind of hiding in plain sight. So this is quite bullish. Now, one thing that's been bothering me is I've seen a few of these sort of news items pop up. You can see here, Cameco price target raised to $68.50 at CIBC. And the whole time I've sort of seen these price targets sort of up way higher, and I've been thinking to myself, well, how can we get there? Because if what I've been thinking is right, it looks like a struggle for it to get up there, and therefore have what I've been thinking, is that wrong? Well, yeah, of course, could be. I definitely could be. And so if you're sort of presented with some new evidence, you've got to take that on board and think, okay, well, what else could we have going on here? Now, I've seen this fractal used, and I personally, I wouldn't be trying to apply this to this. I think that is an error. Don't do it. This doesn't look anything like this to me at all. I mean, unless you were looking at like a microcosm down in this section, okay, unless you were thinking that this movement down here was, akin to this movement, and that the rip is going to take us to infinity. I'm not saying that won't happen, but this isn't GameStop. I don't think we're going to get the run like that. But what I had been thinking, which is where I possibly need to correct myself, is I thought that what we were going to get, and even though this doesn't look the same either, is a three-wave move. Okay, so the way that I'd been looking at it is that this section here, which I still think is a triangle, was the corrective middle part of the movement. But I could be wrong about this. Now, the way I'd been looking at this is that we had a completed impulse up to this point, and that we'd gone into what I thought was a B-wave triangle. Now, that's still a triangle, I think, for all intents and purposes. But maybe it's not a B-wave. Maybe it's actually a four-wave, because when we talk about triangles in an Elliott sense, triangles either appear in wave B or they appear in wave 4. They do not appear in wave 2. So that was the problem I was having before this triangle played out and we broke out of it. I was thinking, well, yeah, this could possibly be 1, 2, and then we're going to go on. But the problem is that this triangle eliminated this as being a 1, 2. But what I haven't really considered until now, and a friend of mine sort of pointed this count out to me, he's put it out on Twitter, and I think it's got some validity, because it kind of allows the thinking around the pattern to open up to much higher prices, which, I guess you could argue does align a lot better with the fundamentals and the overall thesis of a uranium shortage. And so what we've actually got going in here is 1, a pretty skinny 2. If this is actually 3, and this is actually a wave 4, and this is actually a wave 5. Okay, now we're talking, because what we can think now is that, okay, well, possibly this is all part of the same impulse. And if we're going to get that, then we're certainly open to higher prices like this. And that pattern would then fit a bit better that the fundamentals that we see, and the thesis around the shortage of uranium in the market. So this clears up a lot of questions for me if this count proves to be right, I think, because I have been struggling with seeing how we're going to get higher, but labeling it up this way, which is valid, gives us room. Now, the only potential problem with this count remains through this section. It's a bit of a nightmare to put it together. You can do it, but you are shuffling a fair bit to get an impulse, a clean. It's, well, whichever way you do it, it's not clean. It looks like, you know, 3 waves and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the problem is there's overlaps. It is problematic. Any way you dice it, it is problematic. But I think what helps is that this, even if you count this as, you can count this as part of the triangle, or you can count this as 1, 2. Even if you don't, even if you count it, sorry, I'm digressing a bit here, but even if you count this sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think either way you dice it, there's a pretty good case for 5 waves going in off this breakout. Okay, and that makes me think, okay, well maybe, yeah, that maybe there is a bit of validity here. So let's just check it out, because if this is right, then the connotations remain the same, but we'll just move in a bit closer to have a look. So I think last week I came in here and I was thinking that this was looking close to the top, which I still think it is. But, you know, we're still pushing it, and maybe we just push out for one more high like that. But now I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe there's a good case that that's either a 1 wave or an A wave. Okay, and that what I was getting wrong is that this whole movement is part of one movement. But I think, regardless of whether or not I'm right or wrong on the bigger picture, I still think up close, what you'd be thinking is that this still looks like it's trying to top out. But what would that mean? So, well, just basically what I would be expecting off this, I'll just go back out to the big picture to show you, is on a very basic level, I would expect that after this tops out, that then we'd get a correction back down. That it doesn't have to go 50%. It can be a very short correction, but I'd expect a correction. But what that would mean from here is, you know, and this could take a little while. You know what I mean? Like this could take some time. Is that after we get this, like something that looks like a three wave down that's clean. And often what Elliott tells us that the wave 2 correction at the bigger degree will usually come down into the price of wave 4. So that would be sort of how you'd line that up, and then it'd come in to just test all this again. I mean, that's a mighty fall from the top, of course. I mean, we don't particularly want to see that, but you know, that's how I expect it. But what I would expect off that, well, when I look at this, I'd be expecting another impulsive rip that would go at least, I'd be looking for at least 100% of this move, okay? And if this is 1, 2, and if this was going to be a 3 wave, then I'd be thinking that it could go up like this, okay? I'm not suggesting that is definitely what's going to happen, or I mean, it could happen. I'm not saying it can't, but what I'm saying is the way that I'm looking at this pattern now on potentially this as being a 1 wave rather than a 3 wave move opens up much higher prices. I mean, it won't happen in the time frame that most people want. They never do. But the point remains, I'd be expecting at least that. I mean, this is sort of crystal ball modeling, but that's, in an Elliott sense, that is what you would expect. Now, another thing that would, you know, sort of get my attention would be, okay, just say this did play out like this. If this was going to be a 3 wave, I'd probably expect it to remain within the trend. But if it had enough power and speed to break out of the trend, then I'd be thinking, you know, here or up here. That's how I'd be looking at it. So this is a much more bullish scenario. And if it did play out like this, that's how the door opens to these higher prices in terms of putting it together in a pattern. Now, the problem with putting together these patterns is that, yes, they are quite retrospective. We sort of label the market as it unfolds, and we're not really sure about what's gone on until it's in the rear vision mirror. So it then just becomes a matter of just looking at the levels, you know, just simply looking at the levels, and when they hit levels, it's like, well, can we put a structure around what price has done as it respects these old levels, as Cameco has done here? We'll just clean this chart up a bit. So we know we've come into some some pretty good areas here, and do we get a reaction away? Now, nothing says it's got to come deep, and you know what? Maybe this is all completely wrong as well, and maybe it just does this. I really, it could. Maybe it just goes up and does that, and then I've got to come back and think, well, okay, well, this is probably not right. I've now got to think of something else. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting for these patterns to play out, all I can do is look at the levels and just see how the market's reacting off its supply and demand and support and resistance zones. And that's why Elliott's not the be-all and end-all. It's just a supporting methodology of describing where you think the market is at and what stage it's at. So just put all that aside, because a lot of people think it's just not worth pursuing, it's rubbish, and we just look at what's happening here. We know we've got a bit of a breakout here of this little consolidating sort of trend that we're in, but we've just tapped into this area a couple of times now. Actually, almost every 1, 2, 3, 4 times we've tapped this area, and we're just turning away from it a little bit. We're not there yet, so that's why I still think the market is in danger of a more major correction. But like I said, these areas, and this is why I don't really need to go over that, these areas still remain crucial. And that ties into this cyclical outlook, where even though this is the peak here on day 29, I'm just wondering if we've got just another little push, because the translation of the cycle, meaning the midpoint of the cycle, this would have to fail below this level in a longer cycle now to make me think that to help me think that the top was in. So I've got the next cycle low pegged to somewhere in between these dates, somewhere in this box. So obviously I don't know what's going on, but to me, the way this is shaping up, and even leaning back onto Elliott a little bit, that this looks like it hasn't quite completed. To me, it sort of looks like, that this is like the top of, maybe you've got something like 1, 2, 3, 4, and it just looks like it needs one more little push, which would probably make more a right translated cycle. So if the cycle's right translated, so if this represents the cycle, if the cycle's right translated, it would mean that what we would see is that the midpoint of the cycle would be later in the time. Okay, it'd be like this would be the high, something like that, and the whole thing would sort of slope that way. Okay, that's what I mean by right translated. It spends more time going up than it spends going down, and then obviously in a left translated cycle, the cycle peak is earlier in the time frame. Okay, so what I think's happening here, by the look of it, is that we're getting something that's a bit more like that. Okay, now that would make daily cycle 6. That would be a long cycle, but after that, there's got to be a failure at some point. So maybe then what happens is we get this cycle, and then we'll get something more like that. Okay, and we'll start the correction, but this is all yet to happen. Of course, this is still a little bit esoteric and a little bit crystal ball gazing. So I didn't really want to go over too much more in this video, because I just really wanted to focus on what I could see as a possibility emerging once my friend had pointed out to me that, hey, what about this count? Because it certainly does open the door to much higher prices. But, the problem then will become that if this is going to work out that way, we are more than likely going to have to withstand a much more major sort of correction. It could be shallower, but just generally speaking, that's what you'd be thinking. So that remains to be seen. But all the other things that I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks still hold true. Okay, we are still getting this divergence on the weekly in the RSI. We know the daily's diverging. Okay, so you just have to be a bit cautious. But there is a way to, all's not lost. I think there is a way to label this, all right, that allows a path for price a lot higher than where we sit. So that is not a bad thing. So look, that's really all I'm going to do today. Just a little bit shorter and sweeter. I just think that there hasn't been as much going on to really There's nothing particularly new going on, but that is just one different way that I'm looking at this market, thinking, okay, yeah, there could be something a bit different from what I have been thinking going on here. So let's see how that develops. So that's it. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and thanks to everyone who has been liking and subscribing to the videos. And I'll see you next week. Bye for now.